My name is Nathan Matthews, and in 2015, I drove my RV up to Banff National Park in Canada for a solo camping trip. After years stuck behind a desk crunching numbers as an accountant, I figured some fresh mountain air might clear my head better than any therapist could. I arrived at the park in the early afternoon, the towering peaks of the Rockies casting long shadows over the winding roads. The crisp scent of pine filled the air, and I couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. I'd always been more of an indoors guy. My idea of adventure was trying a new flavor of instant ramen, but something about this place made me feel alive. Finding a secluded spot by a tranquil lake, I parked the RV and set up camp. As I fumbled with the tent poles, I chuckled at myself. "Nathan, wilderness man," I muttered. "Next thing you know, you'll be wrestling bears." Though, given my scrawny frame, the only thing I'd be wrestling was a stubborn jar of peanut butter. As the sun dipped lower, I decided to explore a nearby trail. The path was quiet, except for the occasional rustling of wildlife. About a mile in, I spotted a small group of hikers heading my way. 2 men and a woman. They looked like they belonged on the cover of an outdoor magazine, rugged, confident, and not a hair out of place. "Hey there," one of the men greeted as we crossed paths. "Name's Lucas. This is Maya and Ben." "Nathan," I replied, shaking their hands. "First time up here? Any tips for a newbie camper?" Maya smiled. "Stick to the trails, don't feed the wildlife, and if you hear banjo music, run the other way." We all laughed. "Noted," I said. Good to know deliverance jokes are universal. They continued on their way, and I felt a bit lighter having made some friendly contact. Maybe I wasn't as out of place here as I thought. Back at the campsite, I cooked up some instant noodles, so much for branching out, and settled by the fire. The stars began to speckle the sky, and I found myself staring up, pondering life's big questions, like why I hadn't done this sooner. A sudden snap of a twig pulled me from my thoughts. I glanced around but saw nothing. Probably just a critter, I told myself. But then I heard it again, closer this time. I stood up, peering into the darkness. "Hello?" I called out. Silence. "If that's you, Yogi, I don't have any picnic baskets." No response. Shaking off the unease, I sat back down, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Deciding it was just my overactive imagination, I headed into the RV for the night. Sleep didn't come easily. Every rustle of leaves or hoot of an owl had me on edge. "Great job, Nathan," I whispered. Scared of the dark at 35. Morning arrived, and with it a determination not to let my nerves ruin the trip. I planned to hike a longer trail that promised stunning views of the valley. As I prepared my gear, I noticed something odd, footprints around the RV that weren't mine. They were boot prints, but heavier, deeper. Maybe Lucas and his friends passed by, I thought, though it didn't make much sense. Shrugging it off, I set out on the trail. The hike was challenging but rewarding. The panoramic view at the summit was breathtaking. I snapped photos, feeling a genuine smile spread across my face. On the way back, the trail forked, and I took a path I hadn't noticed before, thinking it might be a shortcut. After 20 minutes, I realized I was off course. The trees grew denser, and the canopy above thickened, casting near endless shadows. "Well, lost in the woods. Classic Nathan," I muttered. As I turned to backtrack, I caught sight of something on the ground, a glint of metal. Bending down, I picked up a rusted hunting knife. The blade was stained, and not just with rust. A chill ran through me, not from fear, but from a gut feeling that something was very wrong. I heard footsteps behind me. Spinning around, I saw a figure standing about 20 feet away, a man in tattered clothing, his face obscured by a dirty baseball cap. His posture was rigid, and in his hand he held a rifle. "Didn't mean to trespass," I said, forcing a smile. "Just a bit turned around." He didn't respond. Instead, he took a slow step forward. I noticed then that his clothes were smeared with what looked like dried mud. Or was it something else? "Are you okay?" I asked. He lifted his head slightly, and I caught a glimpse of his eyes, cold and devoid of emotion. "You shouldn't be here," he said in a flat tone. "Right, I'll just head back the way I came." As I moved to walk past him, he blocked my path. Panic started to bubble up. "Look, I don't want any trouble." He tilted his head. "Trouble. Trouble finds everyone, eventually. Without warning, he swung the butt of the rifle at me. I barely dodged, stumbling backward. Adrenaline surged through my veins. I turned and ran. Branches whipped against my face as I tore through the underbrush. I could hear his heavy footsteps behind me. Why is this happening? I thought, my lungs burning. Bursting into a clearing, I tripped over something and fell hard. Pushing myself up, I glanced back and felt my stomach drop. Protruding from the ground was a pale, lifeless hand. I scrambled away, horror gripping me. Nearby, partially covered by leaves, was the body of Ben, the hiker I had met the day before. His eyes stared blankly skyward, a gash visible across his throat. A sickening realization hit me. I had to get help. I forced myself to move, sprinting toward where I thought the main trail was. The forest seemed to close in around me, every direction looking the same. Behind me, the man's voice called out, sing-song and chilling. Come out, wherever you are." I spotted a small cave entrance ahead. Without thinking, I ducked inside, pressing myself against the cool stone. My breaths were ragged, heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. Minutes passed. The forest was silent. Peering out cautiously, I saw no sign of him. Maybe he'd gone another way. Gathering my courage, I emerged, keeping low. Making my way carefully, I heard muffled voices. Hope sparked. I wasn't alone. Following the sound, I approached another campsite. 2 park rangers were there, discussing something over a map. "Help," I whispered urgently, stepping into the open. They looked up, startled. "Sir, are you all right?" one of them asked. "There's a man out here. He attacked me. He killed someone." Their expressions shifted to concern. "Slow down. Tell us what happened." As I recounted the events, one ranger radioed for backup while the other stayed with me. "We've had reports of missing hikers recently," he said grimly. "Didn't think we'd find them like this." A rustling nearby snapped our attention. The man emerged from the trees, rifle aimed. "Looks like we've got company," he sneered. "Drop your weapon," the ranger commanded, drawing his handgun. The man fired first, hitting the ranger in the shoulder. Chaos erupted. The second ranger tackled me to the ground as more shots rang out. From my position, I saw the injured ranger fire back, hitting the assailant in the leg. The man stumbled but didn't go down. His gaze locked onto me, fury burning in his eyes. Backup arrived then, more rangers and local police swarming the area. The man, realizing he was outnumbered, retreated into the forest. They pursued him, and I was escorted back to safety. Later, I learned that Maya, the female hiker, had also been found dead, not far from where I'd stumbled upon Ben. The man was identified as Samuel Griggs, a former hunter who'd lost his grip on reality after a personal tragedy. He believed the park belonged to him and that outsiders were trespassers to be eliminated. The authorities never caught him. Despite extensive searches, he seemed to have vanished into the wilderness. I returned home, the weight of the experience heavy, but not crushing. Life went on, as it tends to do. The fog was thicker than I'd expected. I pulled my RV into a secluded clearing in Pisgah National Forest and stepped out into the damp air, the smell of wet earth heavy in my nose. Everything was muffled, as though the forest was holding its breath. The trees were shrouded in mist, their trunks fading into the gloom, and the trail I had heard so much about was hidden somewhere out there waiting for me. I'd come here to find something unique. My vlog had been stagnating, and I needed a fresh angle. A fellow hiker had mentioned an unmarked trail, a path that didn't appear on any maps, one that locals said disappeared and reappeared as though it had a life of its own. Perfect. If I could document it and film the mystery, my audience would eat it up. I grabbed my camera and set it up, filming a quick introduction. Hey everyone, it's Nate here, and I'm in the middle of the misty Pisgah National Forest, about to track down the infamous Vanishing Trail. Legend says this path comes and goes, and people who wander too far down it don't come back. Let's see if that's true. I packed up my gear and set off into the fog. The forest was silent, the only sound my boots crunching on the damp leaves. I had a GPS in my pocket, just in case, but I didn't plan to use it unless things got really bad. I wanted to go off the grid, find this mysterious trail, and see if there was anything to the rumors. I'd always been a skeptic. Ghost stories and folklore were fun to tell around a campfire, but not much else. As I walked, the fog thickened, swallowing the trees. It clung to my skin, cold and heavy. It wasn't long before I found the first strange marker. A stone slab jutting from the ground, its surface covered in symbols, strange, spiraling shapes that didn't look like any language I knew. I filmed it, talking into the camera as I described the find. This looks like something from an old burial ground, but there's no mention of this on any maps. Really makes you wonder what else is out here, hidden beneath the fog. I kept moving, the trees closing in tighter. The trail I was following became fainter, more overgrown, and soon it was little more than a game trail, barely wide enough to follow. I pushed forward, keeping my camera rolling, but after another hour of hiking, the trail simply disappeared. One moment there had been a clear path, and now it was gone, swallowed by the forest. The mist curled around the trees, thick and almost suffocating, but I was certain I'd been on the right trail. I checked my GPS, but the signal flickered weakly. The screen showed that I was in the middle of nowhere. No path, no landmarks, just a blank screen with a blinking dot. Me, standing alone in the fog. "Okay," I muttered. "You've dealt with worse." I turned back the way I'd come, but the forest looked different now. The trees seemed closer together, the undergrowth denser. The fog was disorienting, and I had to rely on instinct to retrace my steps. The GPS was useless. I kept walking, scanning the ground for signs of the trail, but there was nothing. I was starting to feel uneasy. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, not mine. I froze, listening. The sound came from deeper in the forest, slow, deliberate footsteps crunching on the leaves. I turned, scanning the fog, but there was nothing, just the swirling mist. Then, out of the gloom, a figure emerged. An older man, his clothes tattered and damp, his eyes wide and vacant. "Hey," I called, my voice echoing through the stillness. "You lost too?" The man looked at me for a moment, then shuffled forward. He seemed off. His clothes were torn, his face pale, and there was a distant look in his eyes like he wasn't entirely there. "I've been walking for days," he said, his voice hoarse. "The trail, it keeps changing." "Are you okay?" I asked, stepping toward him. He shook his head. "No one's okay out here." I frowned, feeling a cold knot of fear tighten in my stomach. "What do you mean?" "The trail, it moves. I've seen it, watched it disappear and reappear. It's not just a path, it's the forest. It doesn't want us to leave." I stared at him, my mind racing. This guy was either delirious or onto something. Either way, I didn't like the way he was talking. "Look," I said, pulling out my GPS, "we can find our way back." The man glanced at the GPS, then back at me. "It won't help. The forest is messing with it." I didn't believe him. I couldn't. I was a rational guy, and this was just a forest. I'd get us back to my RV, get him some help, and be done with it. But as we walked, things got stranger. The mist thickened, wrapping around the trees like a living thing. The forest seemed to shift with every step. What had been an open path a moment ago was now choked with brambles. When I looked back, the trees seemed to loom closer, twisting into unfamiliar shapes. The man, whose name I learned was Eli, grew more agitated with every passing minute. "It's watching us," he muttered. "It knows we're here." "Who's watching?" I asked, growing impatient. "The forest," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's alive, and it's been here long before we were." I ignored him, focusing on the GPS, but even that was failing me. The screen flickered, the signal cutting in and out. At one point, it showed me standing on a clear path, but when I looked up, there was nothing but trees, thick, twisted trees that looked like they had grown there for centuries. We kept walking, the fog growing thicker, pressing in on us. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, and then the whispers started. Faint at first, like the wind through the leaves, but then more distinct, voices calling out from the mist. "Nate." I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. "Did you hear that?" I asked. Eli nodded, his eyes wide. "It's calling us. The forest." I tried to shake it off, tell myself it was just the wind, but deep down I knew that wasn't true. The voice had spoken my name. We came across a backpack tangled in the branches of a tree high above our heads. It was old, covered in dirt and torn, but when I climbed up to retrieve it, I found fresh supplies inside. Water, food, like someone had packed it yesterday. I felt a chill run down my spine. How had it gotten there? Eli was growing more paranoid, his eyes darting around as though he expected the trees to come alive at any moment. "We need to leave," he kept saying, "before it's too late." We pushed forward, but no matter which direction we went, we ended up back where we started. The fog seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, the whispers growing louder. Then, without warning, Eli was gone. I turned around and he was just gone. The forest had swallowed him whole without a sound. I called out his name, but there was no response, only the dense mist pressing in on me. Panic set in. I was alone, lost in a forest that didn't want me to leave. The GPS was useless, and my camera was flickering, showing distorted footage of things I hadn't seen, shadows moving in the trees, figures lurking just out of sight. I started running, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The trees twisted and shifted around me, the fog so thick I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Every time I thought I'd found a way out, the forest closed in, trapping me in a maze of branches and brambles. The whispers were louder now, calling my name over and over. My camera caught glimpses of movement, dark figures moving through the mist, vanishing before I could focus on them. I didn't know what was real anymore. The forest seemed to warp around me, bending reality to its will. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the fog broke. I stumbled out of the trees and found myself back at my RV. The mist lingered at the edge of the forest, but it didn't follow. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, threw my gear into the RV, and drove off, my hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't stop until I was miles away, the forest a distant memory in the rearview mirror. Back home, I reviewed the footage. I expected to see the horror I'd witnessed, the proof of the vanishing trail and the strange, shifting forest. But the videos showed nothing. The trail looked normal. The mist wasn't as thick, and Eli wasn't in the footage at all. It was like he'd never existed. I tried to tell myself it had been a bad trip, that my mind had played tricks on me. But deep down, I knew the truth. The forest had let me leave, but it hadn't forgotten me. And I had a feeling it was waiting, somewhere in the mist, for me to return. My name's Adam Patterson, and back in 2017, I decided to set out on what I thought was just going to be a peaceful camping trip. I'd rented an RV and was headed up to the Boundary Waters in Minnesota, one of the last real wilderness areas left in the Midwest. I'd just gone through a messy breakup, one of those the dog stays with me deals, and thought that getting into the thick of nature might clear my head. Of course, I thought I'd be on my own for a few days, doing nothing more than fishing, grilling, maybe reading a bad detective novel. I wasn't really prepared for anything out of the ordinary. I mean, who would be? So there I was, parked at a site that was basically as far out as my RV could take me. Not a single soul in sight, just me and the trees pressing close, the smell of pine and the sound of wind rushing through thick branches. I had my own little campfire going, cooking a half-burned hot dog and poking at the coals with a stick. The campsite was wedged between a rock face and a narrow trail that led into a small valley. The only access road was a twisting, barely there dirt path, something you'd need four-wheel drive just to crawl through, which was exactly why I had chosen it. I figured it would be a nice, quiet evening, maybe even boring. Around dusk, though, I heard something in the distance. At first, I brushed it off as a deer or some animal rustling in the brush, but it got louder. It was the kind of sound that sticks in your gut because it's too out of place. Not the typical crunch or snap of branches you'd expect, but something else, something heavier and somehow purposeful. I tried to laugh it off, muttering something dumb to myself like, "All right, Bigfoot, don't make me come over there." But the noise kept going, each crunch louder, closer, then silence. The kind of silence where you feel like the whole world's holding its breath. Out of nowhere, a man just walked right into my camp, as if he belonged there. No warning, no hello. Just there he was, tall, wiry, with a face that looked like it had been whittled out of driftwood. He wore an old military jacket, camo pants, and heavy black boots caked in dried mud. His hair hung down like dirty straw, and there was something off about him. The way he stood too still, staring right at me with this dead expression, like he'd seen the worst things imaginable and carried them with him. "Got any spare firewood?" he asked, his voice low and scratchy, barely above a whisper. I don't know why, but my instinct was to play it cool. I told him sure, there was some by the fire, and gestured to a small pile next to my cooler. He just stared at me, unsmiling, before he picked up a few pieces and stacked them onto my fire like he owned it. Then he sat down across from me, close enough that I could see the dirt under his nails. "Nice spot you got here," he said, still not looking away. "Yeah," I mumbled, trying to keep things light. "Good place to get some peace and quiet. Not many folks around." "Peace is what people say they're after, until they find it," he replied, poking the fire with a stick. I laughed awkwardly, wondering what he was on about. He just sat there, still, like he was waiting for something. After a few more minutes of awkward silence, I tried to steer the conversation back to normal, asking if he was camping nearby. He didn't answer immediately, just stared at the flames as if he hadn't heard me. Finally, he looked up, fixing me with this unnervingly blank look. "I don't camp," he said, his voice steady, cold. "I'm just passing through, following an old path." It was at that point I started feeling like I might have made a mistake coming up here alone. This guy, whoever he was, didn't seem like someone who'd gotten lost on a weekend getaway. He felt intentional. The way he just sat there, his words dripping out slow, his gaze dark and unblinking. I cleared my throat, trying to break the spell. "Well, I'm heading out tomorrow anyway. Gotta get back to civilization, right?" I said, forcing a laugh. The man didn't blink. "You sure about that?" Now here's the thing. I was getting uncomfortable, but I didn't want to look like I was afraid of him, especially when we were miles from anyone who would hear me if I yelled. Instead, I tried to play it off, leaning back in my chair and cracking another cheap joke about Bigfoot. But the man didn't laugh. He just kept staring at me, his gaze sharpening as if he was sizing me up. Then he asked, "You ever feel like something's watching you out here?" "Not really," I lied, though by now my skin was crawling. I shrugged and took a long sip from my bottle, hoping he'd take the hint and move along, but he didn't. Instead, he leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. "They come out at night, you know, the quiet ones, the ones who don't belong anywhere else. You don't see them, but they see you. They know when you're alone." I tried to keep my face neutral, though inside every instinct I had was screaming at me to get away. But what was I going to do? Just get up and walk into the trees with him sitting right there. So I sat there, trapped, my mind racing, waiting for him to give up and go. Eventually, he stood up, and I felt this rush of relief, until he looked down at me and said, "Careful, not everything that goes into the woods comes back out." With that, he turned and walked off, disappearing down the path toward the valley. For a few minutes, I just sat there, feeling a strange mix of relief and disbelief. I kept telling myself that he was just some weirdo, that I'd laugh about it later. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every sound, every whisper of leaves felt like it had a purpose, like it was waiting for me to let my guard down. Sometime around midnight, I heard the noise again, louder this time. I got up, grabbed my flashlight, and scanned the area. Nothing but shadows. I almost convinced myself it was all in my head until I caught a flash of movement out of the corner of my eye. Someone ducking behind a tree. I yelled out, "Who's there?" hoping I sounded more intimidating than I felt. No answer. I shone the flashlight in the direction where I'd seen the movement, and that's when I saw it. A small pile of sticks arranged in a circle right by the edge of my campsite, like some kind of makeshift trap or marker. And right in the center was my old pocket knife, one I'd left back in the RV. I didn't waste another second. I spun around, scrambling back to the RV as fast as I could, My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the keys, and I barely managed to get the door shut before I heard footsteps crunching outside. Inside, I locked everything I could, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst. I peered out through one of the windows, just in time to see him standing there in the beam of the flashlight I'd dropped. He didn't even look angry, just determined. Without taking his eyes off the RV, he reached down, picked up my flashlight, and flicked it off, plunging everything into darkness. My whole body froze. I didn't know what to do, so I just waited, every nerve on edge, listening for any sound, any clue. Then, like some horror movie cliche, I heard the slow scrape of metal along the side of the RV. I don't know if it was a knife, a piece of wire, or something worse, but he dragged it slowly, deliberately, making sure I knew he was still there. Waiting. I gripped my phone, fingers shaking as I tried to dial 911, but there was no signal out here. Nothing. Hours passed like that. Every now and then he'd make another sound, tapping on the window, scraping along the walls, or whispering something I couldn't quite make out, just loud enough to keep me alert, just quiet enough to keep me guessing. Then, as dawn started to break, I finally worked up the courage to peek outside. He was gone. Or, at least, I thought he was. The campsite was dead quiet, like he'd never been there at all. But the ground around my RV was littered with sticks, broken branches, and strange little symbols carved into the dirt. Right by my door, he'd left a note, scrawled on a scrap of bark, a final parting gift. The note was simple. Not everything that goes into the woods comes back out. Remember that. I didn't waste any more time. I threw everything I could grab into the RV, fired up the engine, and got out of there, without looking back. I wasn't supposed to be here, not really, not in this forest, not sitting in this RV, staring at the tall trees outside, wondering if this trip would be my last. Gifford Pinchot National Forest had been Karen's idea years ago. She had this way of looking at the world, seeing the beauty in everything. She wanted to camp here, hike the trails, soak in the stillness of the ancient trees. I didn't get it then, too caught up in work, too busy to care. But now, it was all I had left. It had been a year since she died, and I still couldn't make sense of it. A car accident on a quiet street. Just like that. She was gone. And I was left stumbling through life, trying to figure out how to exist without her. This trip was my last attempt at finding something, anything that made sense. So here I was, parked deep in the middle of nowhere, hoping that the forest would somehow offer answers. I didn't know what else to do. The trees stretched up into the sky, their thick trunks casting shadows that lingered even in the daylight. It was beautiful, in a way, but it felt empty without her. I could almost hear her voice telling me to look at the wildflowers or marvel at the way the sunlight filtered through the branches. I stepped out of the RV, the cool, damp air wrapped around me. The scent of pine and moss was thick, earthy. Everything seemed so alive, and yet all I could feel was the weight of the past pressing down on me. I started a small fire, just like I'd done the past few nights, and sat there watching the flames dance. The crackling wood was the only sound in the stillness. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. They were faint, barely audible over the fire, but distinct enough to make me stand up, heart pounding in my chest. I looked around, scanning the tree line, but saw nothing, just shadows. I told myself it was probably a deer or maybe some other animal, but the feeling stuck, the sense that someone was watching me. I wasn't alone. I sat back down, trying to shake the unease, but it lingered. I couldn't stop thinking about the old man I'd met the day before. Edgar. He'd been wandering the campground when I arrived, his wrinkled face covered in a scruffy beard, eyes sharp despite his age. He was friendly enough, but there had been something off about him. "You came at the wrong time," he'd said, staring at me with a knowing look. "Why is that?" I'd asked, brushing it off. "Some things shouldn't be disturbed, especially at night. The forest, it has its secrets." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't respond. But his words stuck with me, replaying in my mind as I sat by the fire. What did he mean by secrets? What was he talking about? I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now, sitting in the dark with the fire flickering low, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to what he'd said. The wind picked up, making the trees sway, their branches creaking overhead. The fire sputtered as the breeze caught it, and I stood up again, feeling restless. I needed to move, to walk, anything to clear my head. I grabbed my flashlight and headed into the forest, just far enough to feel like I was doing something. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the trunks of the trees but casting long shadows everywhere else. My footsteps were the only sound now, crunching softly on the forest floor. I don't know how far I walked before I saw the first symbol. It was carved into the bark of a tree, a spiral-like shape that looked old, weathered by time. I crouched down, running my fingers over it. It was smooth, unnaturally so, like it had been carved recently. I stood up, shining the light around, and spotted more symbols carved into the trees at odd intervals, spirals, faces, shapes that made no sense. They all seemed to be pointing deeper into the forest, like a trail leading me somewhere. A chill ran down my spine. I turned back, trying to ignore the nagging curiosity that pulled at me. I wasn't here to chase after strange carvings. I was here to, well, I didn't know why I was here anymore, but this wasn't it. As I made my way back toward the RV, the air seemed heavier, colder. I couldn't hear the wind anymore, and the shadows seemed darker. The feeling that I was being watched returned, stronger this time, like someone, or something, was following me. My pulse quickened, and I picked up the pace, glancing over my shoulder every few steps. Nothing, just trees and shadows. When I reached the RV, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The fire had gone out, leaving nothing but smoldering embers. I climbed inside, locked the door behind me, and sat on the edge of the bed, heart still racing. I was just tired. That's all it was. The grief, the isolation, it was messing with my head. I hadn't been sleeping well, and the loneliness had a way of playing tricks on the mind. At least, that's what I told myself. The next morning, I met Leah. She was hiking near the campground, a pack slung over her shoulders, looking every bit the confident outdoors woman. She was friendly, outgoing, and struck up a conversation with me as soon as we crossed paths. "You camping out here alone?" she asked, her voice light, casual. I nodded. "Yeah, needed some time away, I guess." "I get that," she said, smiling. "This place is something else. It's beautiful, but it can get a little weird at night, don't you think?" I paused, remembering the footsteps, the carvings, Edgar's warnings. "Weird?" I asked. "How strange it can feel out here after dark. Just stories, old legends. You know how it is with places like this. Every forest has its ghost stories." I tried to keep my tone neutral, but the unease from the night before still lingered. She smiled again, but this time, there was something in her eyes, like she knew more than she was letting on. "Just be careful. It's easy to get lost out here," she said. With that, she waved and continued down the trail, disappearing into the trees. I watched her go, wondering if I should have said more, asked her what she meant, but I didn't. I spent the rest of the day at camp trying to relax, but the sense of unease only grew stronger. That night, as I sat by the fire again, I couldn't stop thinking about the symbols. They'd seemed so deliberate, so purposeful, like someone or something was trying to lead me deeper into the woods. And then the footsteps returned. This time, they were louder, closer. I stood up, shining my flashlight toward the trees, but saw nothing, just shadows. But the footsteps didn't stop. They circled the RV, slow, deliberate, crunching on the forest floor. My throat tightened as I strained to listen, my heart hammering in my chest. "Who's there?" I called out, but the footsteps didn't answer. Instead, they stopped. Dead silence. I backed toward the RV, fumbling for the door when I saw it. Movement, just at the edge of the trees. A figure, tall, thin, barely visible in the darkness. I blinked, and it was gone. I bolted inside, slamming the door behind me, my breath coming in short gasps. What the hell was happening? I sat there for hours, staring at the door, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. The next morning, Leah was gone. Her tent was still there, her pack sitting neatly outside, but she was nowhere to be found. I searched the area, calling her name, but the forest was silent. It didn't make sense. People didn't just vanish like that, not without a trace. I thought about Edgar, about the stories he'd told, the forgotten one, he'd called it. A legend about a man who'd wandered too far into the forest, losing himself until he became part of the land itself. Now, they said he lured others to join him, preying on their grief, their loneliness, until they disappeared too. I didn't believe it. I couldn't. But Leah was gone, and the symbols were still there, etched into the trees like a warning or an invitation. The footsteps returned that night, and this time I knew what they wanted. I could hear her voice, Karen's voice, calling to me from the trees. Soft, loving, like she was right there, waiting for me. "Derek," she whispered, "come find me." My heart ached, torn between the impossible and the undeniable. I knew it wasn't real. I knew it, but I wanted to believe it was. I stepped outside. The cold air bit at my skin. The forest was dark, silent, but the voice was there, guiding me. I walked toward the trees, my feet moving on their own, drawn by the sound of her voice. "Derek," she called again. "Don't leave me." I stopped at the edge of the woods, staring into the darkness. I could see her now, just beyond the first row of trees, her face, her smile. She was there, waiting for me, but something was wrong. The shadows around her shifted, twisting like they were alive. Her eyes, once warm and familiar, were hollow, empty. I took a step back, the spell breaking. This wasn't Karen. I turned and ran back to the RV, back to safety. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees pressing in as the voice grew louder, angrier. I slammed the door behind me, heart pounding, breath coming in ragged gasps. I could still hear her screaming my name from the trees, but I didn't go back. I couldn't. I left Gifford Pinchot the next morning, the RV's engine sputtering to life as I drove away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The forest had its secrets. I wasn't meant to know them. And whatever it was out there, whatever the forgotten one truly was, it would stay there, waiting for someone else. I'm Jerry Bryant, and back in 2020, I took my RV up to the Kenai Peninsula in Alaska for a much-needed escape. I'd been burning the candle at both ends at my software job, and I figured some fresh air and solitude would do me good. After years behind a desk, the call of the wild was too strong to ignore. I packed my gear, said goodbye to the concrete jungle, and hit the open road. The drive was breathtaking. Towering mountains, endless forests, and the kind of silence you can only find miles away from civilization. I settled at a secluded spot near Seward, close to the Kenai Fjords National Park. The locals were friendly enough, though they gave me curious looks when I mentioned camping alone. One guy at a gas station chuckled and said, "You must really like your own company." "Better than some others I've kept," I quipped back, earning a hearty laugh. After setting up camp, I decided to explore a nearby trail. The air was crisp, and the scent of pine was a welcome change from exhaust fumes and takeout. As I walked, I couldn't help but think I might finally write that novel I'd always talked about. About an hour in, I noticed heavy-duty traps scattered off the path. They were large, ominous, and definitely not for small game. "Well, that's one way to catch dinner," I muttered. Seemed excessive, but who was I to judge local hunting customs? Returning to the RV, I found a note pinned to the door in scrawled handwriting. It read, "Not safe here. Leave now." I looked around, expecting to catch someone watching, but the woods were still. "Very funny," I called out. "You almost had me." Shrugging it off as a prank, I crumpled the note and went inside. That night, as I was grilling some burgers, a fellow camper approached. He was tall and lanky, with a wild beard and eyes that seemed to dance with mischief. "Smells good," he said. "Name's Hank." "Leander," I replied. "Want one? I've got plenty." "Don't mind if I do," he grinned. We chatted over dinner. Hank was a wanderer, the kind of guy who collected stories like souvenirs. He had a joke for every occasion. "Why don't bears wear socks?" he asked. "No idea." "Because they have bare feet." I groaned, but couldn't help laughing. His humor was infectious. As the stars blanketed the sky, our conversation turned to local legends. "Ever hear about the Trapper?" Hank asked. Can't say I have. Story goes there's a guy out here who sets traps for more than just animals. People go missing, and all they find are those big snares. I raised an eyebrow. Sounds like a campfire tale. Maybe, he said, looking into the flames, but folks around here take it seriously. Later, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the unease, the note, the traps, Hank's story. It all swirled in my mind. Get a grip, I told myself. You're letting tall tales spook you. The next morning, I decided to hike a different trail, hoping a change of scenery would clear my head. Along the way, I stumbled upon an old cabin tucked behind dense foliage. It looked abandoned, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside, the place was a mess. Rusted tools, torn clothes, and a smell that turned my stomach. On a makeshift table lay an array of knives meticulously arranged. Unease prickled at the back of my neck. Then I saw it, a wall covered in photographs. Some were of landscapes, but others were of people. Campers, hikers, all looking unsuspecting. My heart pounded as I recognized a couple from a missing persons poster I'd seen in town. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around to see Victor, a man I'd briefly met at the fishing spot the day before. Tall, muscular, with a piercing gaze that pinned me in place. Lost? He asked, a cold smile tugging at his lips. Just exploring, I managed to say. Didn't mean to trespass. He stepped closer. Not many folks come this way. Yeah, well, I'll be heading back now. As I moved to pass him, he blocked my path. You shouldn't have come here. Panic surged. Without thinking, I bolted past him, knocking over a chair. He grabbed at me, but I slipped free and darted into the woods. Branches whipped at my face as I ran. The sound of his footsteps closed in behind. My lungs burned, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I could hear him cursing, yelling that I couldn't hide. Bursting into a clearing, I nearly collided with Hank. Whoa, what's going on? He exclaimed. Victor, he's after me. He's... A shot rang out, splintering a tree nearby. Move, Hank shouted. We sprinted toward the campground. Other campers stared as we raced by, confusion turning to alarm as Victor emerged, rifle in hand. Someone call the cops, I yelled. Victor stopped at the edge of the camp, glaring before disappearing back into the woods. The sheriff arrived a half hour later. We recounted everything. The traps, the cabin, the photos. The sheriff sighed. Victor Daniels has been a thorn in our side for a while. Former wildlife biologist who went off the deep end after losing his job. He's dangerous, Hank insisted. You need to arrest him. We'll look into it, the sheriff said, but his tone was dismissive. Frustrated, we decided to take matters into our own hands. Probably not the smartest move, but fear does funny things. That evening, Hank and I armed ourselves with bear spray and a flare gun. Better than nothing. We planned to gather evidence to force the authorities to act. Back at the cabin, the door was ajar. Inside, the space was eerily quiet. The wall of photos was gone. He cleared out, I whispered. A floorboard creaked. Before we could react, the lights went out. Welcome back, Victor's voice echoed. A blinding flashlight beam pinned us. Hank raised the bear spray, but a heavy object struck his hand, sending the canister flying. City boys think they can survive out here, Victor taunted. I fumbled for the flare gun. In the darkness, I couldn't see him, but I could hear his footsteps circling us. Why are you doing this? I demanded. He laughed. Survival of the fittest. Only the strong deserve to roam free. A sudden scuffle sounded as Hank tackled Victor. They grappled, knocking over furniture. I fired the flare gun blindly. The flare ignited the curtains, flames licking upward. Time to go, I shouted, grabbing Hank. We stumbled out as the cabin became an inferno. Victor's screams echoed behind us. Outside, the night was chaos. The fire illuminated the forest, and the distant wail of sirens signaled that someone had finally called for help. The authorities arrived to a scene of devastation. They recovered a body from the wreckage, burned beyond recognition. In the days that followed, evidence emerged linking Victor to multiple disappearances. His twisted ideology was rooted in a manifesto they found in the ashes, detailing his belief that modern society had weakened humanity. Hank and I parted ways soon after. He headed north, always chasing the next adventure. Before he left, he handed me a book. What's this? I asked. Journal I found at the cabin, he said. Figured you might want to read it. I flipped through the pages, Victor's ramblings, plans, and sketches of traps. "Thanks," I said. "Stay safe out there." "Always do," he replied with a wink. Back home, I couldn't shake the experience. I delved into research about Victor Daniels. He'd been a respected scientist once, studying predator behaviors. After budget cuts ended his project, he'd vanished, re-emerging as a predator himself. In the end, he became the very thing he'd studied. A reminder that sometimes the most dangerous animals walk on two legs. I returned to my routine, but with a newfound appreciation for the mundane. The wilderness was beautiful, but I'd had enough adventure to last a lifetime. As a friend once joked, maybe next time try a staycation. Guess he had a point. I thought the desert would heal me. Red Rock Canyon was supposed to be a place to clear my head, to sit in silence and let the vast empty land take away the chaos of the last few months. I'd lost everything, my wife, my job, and I needed something, anything, to remind me there was still some peace left in the world. Instead, it felt like I'd driven into a nightmare. I parked the RV at the far end of the campground, as far away from the few other campers as I could get. I wanted solitude, to think, or maybe to stop thinking. I wasn't sure. The sun was setting as I stepped out, casting a deep orange glow across the red sandstone cliffs. It was beautiful, the kind of beauty that made you feel small, like the world was too big for you to matter. Maybe that's what I needed. I'd been driving for hours, with only the occasional crackle of the radio for company. The RV was old, creaking and groaning as I navigated the winding roads into the canyon. It had seen better days, much like me. As I stretched, a low rumble came from under the hood. "Great," I muttered, giving the RV a half-hearted kick. The engine had been acting up for days, but I figured I could deal with it later. I wasn't here for that. I was here to get away, to let the emptiness of the desert swallow me whole. That night, after I'd settled in, I sat outside the RV, staring up at the stars. Out here, away from the city, the sky was incredible, clear, endless. But as the stars twinkled overhead, I noticed something strange. At first, I thought they were planes, blinking in and out far above the canyon. But then they moved too fast, too erratically. I leaned forward, squinting. There were 3 of them, glowing faintly blue, darting through the sky in impossible patterns. They weren't planes. I wasn't sure what they were. I stood up, straining my neck to follow their path as they circled overhead. They blinked off one by one, and the desert was silent again. Just stars, I told myself, even though I knew it wasn't true. The next morning, I woke up to find the RV's battery almost dead. My phone, which I'd left charging overnight, hadn't gained a single bar. I tried turning the engine over, but all I got was a dull click. My chest tightened. Being stranded in the middle of the desert wasn't part of the plan. I had enough food and water for a few days, sure, but the isolation was starting to feel less like a retreat and more like a trap. Milo's RV was parked a few spots down, his beat-up RV sitting in the shade of a large rock formation. He waved me over as I stepped out of mine, a wide grin on his sunburned face. "Morning," he called. "Beautiful day, huh?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, sure. Hey, you wouldn't happen to have jumper cables, would you?" Milo scratched his scruffy chin, then shook his head. "Sorry, friend, but I can give you a ride into town later if you need help. It's not too far." I thanked him, but something about Milo unsettled me. Maybe it was how relaxed he seemed, like this place wasn't bothering him at all. As I stood there, he tilted his head toward the canyon walls. "You see the lights last night?" he asked. I froze. "Yeah, what were they?" He shrugged, like it was nothing. "Oh, those things. People talk about them all the time. Could be military, could be something else. No one really knows, but they've been around as long as I've been camping out here." I laughed nervously. "Something else, huh?" Milo smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "People say they're not from this world. I don't know about that, but sometimes they follow you. Just don't go too far out at night and you'll be fine." I forced another laugh, but my stomach churned. Milo's tone was too casual, too accepting. I thanked him again and went back to my RV, trying to shake off the feeling that I was missing something important. The day dragged on, the heat baking the ground beneath my feet. I spent the afternoon hiking a short trail near the campground, trying to clear my head, but the vast emptiness only made me feel more alone. I kept thinking about the lights, about how they'd moved, how they seemed to watch me. That night, they returned. I was sitting outside again, nursing a warm beer and staring at the sky when I saw them. 3 faint blue lights hovering over the canyon. This time, they were closer, too close. They flickered almost playfully, darting back and forth like they were searching for something. I stood up, my heart pounding. It didn't make sense. Nothing about this place made sense. I backed toward the RV, never taking my eyes off the lights, but as I reached for the door, the lights blinked out, gone, just like that. A cold breeze swept through the canyon and I shivered. It was too quiet. No wind, no insects, nothing. Just the dead, suffocating silence of the desert. Then the RV lights flickered once, twice, and went dark. My chest tightened as I stumbled into the RV, fumbling for the flashlight. I clicked it on, but the beam was weak, barely cutting through the darkness. The electrical panel was dead, and my phone wouldn't turn on. Every piece of technology I had was failing, and I had no idea why. A sudden knock on the door made me jump. "Chris, you okay?" It was Emily, the hiker I'd met earlier that day. She'd pitched her tent nearby, planning to stay for a few nights before heading out. I opened the door, trying to hide my panic. "Yeah, just some electrical issues," I said, forcing a smile. "Everything's dead. I'm guessing the battery's shot." Emily frowned, glancing back at her tent. "That's weird. My phone's dead too, and my flashlight keeps flickering." Her voice was calm, but I could see the worry in her eyes. She felt it too, the strangeness in the air, the weight of the silence. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Do you think it's the lights? Milo told me about them earlier, said people disappear sometimes." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my breathing steady. "Disappear?" Emily nodded, her gaze drifting toward the canyon. "Yeah, it's mostly stories," but he seemed pretty convinced. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air felt thick, heavy, like the desert was closing in on us. I wasn't sure if I believed in Milo's campfire tales, but the lights, they were real, and they weren't natural. "We should get out of here," Emily said, breaking the silence. "I don't like this." "I can't," I replied. "My RV won't start." She hesitated, then nodded. "Mine either. I tried earlier, but it's completely dead." We stood there, staring at each other, bust thick, the weight of the situation sinking in. Something was wrong with this place. The lights weren't just an oddity. They were doing something, affecting everything around us, and we were stuck miles from any help. "We'll wait till morning," I said, trying to sound confident. "Maybe it's just a temporary glitch. We'll figure it out." Emily didn't look convinced, but she nodded and headed back to her tent. I locked the RV door behind her, though I wasn't sure what good it would do. That night, I barely slept. The silence was oppressive, like a blanket wrapped too tight around me. Every creak of the RV, every gust of wind made my heart race. I kept waiting for the lights to come back, to hover outside my window, but they didn't. Instead, I woke up sometime in the early hours, drenched in sweat, my head pounding. I sat up, blinking in the darkness. Something was wrong. I glanced at my watch. It didn't make sense. I'd checked the time just moments ago, and it had been midnight. Where had the hours gone? I stumbled outside, feeling disoriented. The air was cooler now, the desert's chill settling in. The stars were out, but there was no sign of the lights. My mind was foggy, like I'd been dreaming, but the dust on my boots told me I'd been walking. But where? And why? Panic surged through me. I couldn't remember. Hours were missing, and I had no idea what had happened. The lights were playing with us, toying with our sense of reality. I ran toward Emily's tent, calling her name, but when I got there, she was gone. Her tent was empty, her pack still there, but she was nowhere to be found. "Emily!" I shouted, my voice echoing off the canyon walls. Nothing. The only sound was the wind. I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. But the lights, the missing time, it all pointed to one terrifying conclusion. We weren't alone. I sprinted back to my RV, slamming the door behind me, and tried the engine again. To my shock, it roared to life. The headlights flickered on, and I didn't hesitate. I jammed the gear shift into drive and tore out of the campsite, gravel kicking up behind me as I sped down the winding canyon road. I glanced in the rearview mirror for just a second. I saw them, the blue lights hovering in the distance, watching me leave. I didn't stop driving until I hit the outskirts of Las Vegas. The neon lights of the city felt like a lifeline. But even then, as I pulled into a gas station, my hands shaking, I couldn't shake the feeling that the lights were still out there, waiting. And I wasn't sure if I'd really escaped at all. My name is Dennis Sanders, and back in 2014, I took my RV up to Wrangell St. Elias National Park in Alaska. I figured a solo trip into the wild would be the perfect antidote to my cubicle-induced claustrophobia. Plus, after burning yet another batch of spaghetti at home, I thought maybe the wilderness would help me find my inner Bear Grylls, or at least teach me how not to set off the smoke alarm. I arrived at the park on a crisp August morning. The air was so fresh it felt like nature's version of a deep breath. I parked my RV in a secluded spot near a glacial stream, thinking I'd found my own little slice of paradise. The only neighbors I had were towering pines and the occasional moose, who looked at me like I was the intruder, which, to be fair, I was. After setting up camp, I decided to explore the surroundings, armed with a map, a compass I pretended to know how to use, and a trail mix that was 90% chocolate. I ventured into the forest. The serenity was overwhelming. For once, the only notifications I heard were birds chirping and leaves rustling. It was a far cry from the constant ping of IMs back home. About an hour into my hike, I stumbled upon a small, weathered cabin nestled between the trees. It looked abandoned, with ivy crawling up the sides and windows clouded by dust. Curiosity got the better of me. I thought, why not take a peek? After all, what's the worst that could happen? Famous last words, I know. The door creaked loudly as I pushed it open, revealing a single-room interior cluttered with old furniture and hunting gear. Animal traps, fishing rods, and a wall adorned with antlers suggested that whoever lived here was serious about off-the-grid living, or just had a very specific decorating style. On a dusty table lay a journal. The pages were filled with scribbled notes and sketches of the surrounding area. One entry caught my eye. August 12th, spotted another hiker today. Must be cautious. Can't let anyone find out. That was yesterday's date. A chill settled in my gut. Maybe the cabin wasn't as abandoned as it seemed. I decided it was best to head back to my RV. The sun was starting to dip behind the mountains, and I didn't want to navigate the forest in the dark. As I retraced my steps, I couldn't shake an uneasy feeling. Every snapped twig and rustling leaf set my nerves on edge. I told myself I was being paranoid, perhaps a side effect of too many late-night horror movies and bad campfire stories. Back at the campsite, I cooked dinner over the fire, a culinary masterpiece of canned beans and slightly burnt sausages. I mused that Gordon Ramsay would have a field day critiquing my cooking skills. It's so raw, it might just get up and walk away. I imagined him shouting. I chuckled into the night, the sound echoing among the trees. To lighten the mood further, I started telling jokes to myself. Why don't scientists trust atoms? Because they make up everything. I laughed, appreciating my own terrible sense of humor. It was just me in the wilderness, and I was determined to enjoy every minute. Just as I was considering turning in for the night, I heard a noise, a faint rustling coming from the edge of the clearing. Probably just an animal, I thought. Alaska is full of wildlife. Then I heard it again, louder this time, accompanied by the unmistakable crunch of footsteps on dry leaves. Human footsteps. Who's there? I called out, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Silence. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the tree line. For a moment, I thought I saw a shadow dart between the trees. My heart began to race. Maybe it was another camper, or perhaps my mind was playing tricks on me. Deciding that sitting outside made me feel too exposed, I retreated into the RV and locked the door. I felt a bit silly for being spooked, but better safe than sorry. I settled into bed, convincing myself that a good night's sleep would put everything into perspective. I woke abruptly to a loud thud against the side of the RV. My pulse quickened. That was no falling branch. I listened intently, straining to hear any other sounds. Then came another thud, harder this time, causing the RV to sway slightly. I quietly got out of bed and reached for the small kitchen knife I'd used earlier. Not exactly a weapon of choice, but it was better than nothing. I crept toward the window and peeked out, but the darkness revealed nothing. Suddenly, the RV's door handle jiggled. Someone was trying to get in. Panic surged through me. "Hey, who's out there?" I shouted, hoping to deter whoever it was. The jiggling stopped, momentarily, only to resume more aggressively. I had to think fast. My phone had no signal, so calling for help was out of the question. Then I remembered the flare gun stowed away in a cabinet, a safety precaution I never thought I'd need. I grabbed it and positioned myself facing the door. "Leave now or I'll shoot," I warned. The handle stopped moving. Silence enveloped the RV. Just when I thought it might be over, a heavy object slammed against the door, cracking the frame. I fired the flare gun at the door, the bright light illuminating the interior in a flash of red. The impact startled the intruder, and I heard footsteps retreating into the woods. Breathing heavily, I waited for any sign of return. Minutes passed like hours. When everything remained quiet, I dared to hope that it was over. Sleep was out of the question, so I sat vigil until dawn, clutching the kitchen knife with a white-knuckled grip. As the first light seeped through the windows, I decided to step outside and assess the damage. The door was splintered, hanging ajar from its hinges. On the ground lay a heavy piece of timber, likely used to batter the door. But what caught my attention was a symbol carved into the wood, a crude drawing of an eye with a slash through it. I snapped a photo with my phone, thinking it might be useful evidence. Just then I heard voices in the distance, multiple people talking and laughing. Relief washed over me. Other campers, perhaps? I headed toward the sound, hoping to find help. As I approached, I realized the voices were coming from a small group gathered around a makeshift campsite. They were an odd bunch, dressed in ragged clothes, their faces smudged with dirt. They fell silent as soon as they noticed me. "Morning," I said cautiously. "Did you folks happen to see anyone around here last night?" One of them, a tall man with a tangled beard, stepped forward. "No one but us out here," he replied, his gaze steady and unblinking. I noticed something unsettling. The same symbol from the timber was tattooed on his forearm. "Interesting tattoo," I remarked, trying to keep my tone light. He glanced at his arm. "It's more than a tattoo," he said. "Right. Well, if you see anyone suspicious, let me know. Someone tried to break into my RV last night." He gave a faint smile. "The forest doesn't take kindly to trespassers." I decided it was time to leave. "All right then. Have a good day." I turned to walk away, feeling their eyes on my back like a physical weight. As I hurried back to my RV, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stumbled into something dangerous. I resolved to pack up and get out of there as fast as possible. When I returned, I found my RV ransacked. Drawers were pulled out, belongings scattered, and the words "Leave now" were scrawled across the wall in what looked like charcoal. My heart pounded in my chest. This was no longer just a creepy encounter. It was a direct threat. I gathered what I could and started the engine. As I drove down the dirt road leading out of the park, I caught sight of something in the rearview mirror. The group from earlier, standing in the middle of the road, watching me leave. Just when I thought I was safe, a loud bang echoed from the side of the RV. The vehicle lurched, and I struggled to keep it on the road. I looked out the window to see one of my tires blown out. I cursed under my breath and pulled over to assess the damage. The tire was shredded, and upon closer inspection, I found a makeshift spike strip embedded with nails lying nearby. This was deliberate. Out of nowhere, a figure tackled me, knocking me to the ground. It was the bearded man from the campsite. He held a knife, his eyes wild with intent. We grappled, adrenaline fueling my movements. He slashed at me, grazing my arm. "Why are you doing this?" I shouted, dodging another attack. "Outsiders aren't welcome here," he snarled. I kicked at his knee, causing him to stumble. Seizing the opportunity, I scrambled back toward the RV. Another member of the group appeared, blocking my path. She swung a metal pipe at me. I ducked, and it smashed into the RV's side mirror. Desperate, I remembered the flare gun still tucked into my belt. I pulled it out and aimed it at them. "Back off!" They hesitated, eyeing the weapon. The woman sneered. "That toy won't save you." She advanced, and without thinking, I fired. The flare struck her shoulder, igniting her clothes. She screamed, dropping to the ground to extinguish the flames. The bearded man charged at me in a rage. I sidestepped, causing him to crash into the side of the RV. The impact dazed him. I took the chance to climb into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut. I started the engine. Despite the flat tire, the RV lurched forward, grinding against the road. I didn't care. I just needed to get away. As I sped down the rough path, the vehicle shook violently. The other tires threatened to give out, but I pushed on. In the distance, I saw a ranger station. Relief flooded over me. I pulled up haphazardly, honking the horn wildly. A park ranger emerged, alarmed by the sight of my battered RV and my disheveled state. "Please, I need help," I shouted. He approached cautiously. "Calm down, sir. What's going on?" A group of people attacked me. They're back there, sabotaging the road and attacking campers. His expression grew serious. "Did you say a group?" "Yes. They tried to break into my RV last night and attacked me on the road." He radioed for backup. "You're lucky you made it here. We've had reports of a cult operating in the remote areas of the park." "A cult? They're hostile to outsiders. We've been trying to track them down." Another ranger arrived. They escorted me inside and tended to my wounds. I gave a full account of what happened, showing them the photo of the symbol and describing the attackers. Over the next few hours, law enforcement combed the area. They found the spike strip and evidence of the group's campsite, but the cult members had disappeared. I was advised to stay in town until they could ensure the area was safe. They arranged for my RV to be repaired, and I checked into a local motel. At the motel, the receptionist looked up as I approached the desk. "Rough day?" she asked, eyeing my torn sleeve and bandaged arm. "You could say that," I replied. "I've had better Mondays. At least I didn't have to sit through a budget meeting." She chuckled. "Well, we've got cable and hot water. Sometimes that's all you need. Throw in a decent cup of coffee and you might just convince me to stay forever." The following day, news came in. The authorities had discovered several shallow graves near where my RV had been parked. The bodies of missing hikers were recovered, victims of the cult's gruesome acts. I realized how close I'd come to becoming one of them. As for the cult, they remained at large. Their leader, identified as Marcus Hale, was a former survivalist with a history of violent offenses. He had gathered a group of like-minded individuals preying on unsuspecting campers and hikers. I decided it was time to head home. The allure of the wilderness had lost its charm. Before leaving, I thanked the rangers for their help and provided any additional information they needed. I drove out of Alaska, the road stretching ahead like a promise of safety. As I left, I couldn't help but think about Marcus Hale, a man who had turned his back on society, choosing isolation and violence over humanity. I drove on. The open road ahead, leaving the shadows of the forest and its secrets behind. Six months. 6 whole months without touching a drop. I should have been proud, right? But sitting alone in this RV deep in the Great Smoky Mountains, I didn't feel proud. I felt restless, empty, even the kind of empty that creeps up on you, settling in your bones when there's nothing but the sound of your own thoughts bouncing around your skull. This trip was supposed to be a celebration, a gift to myself for staying clean. I thought the solitude would help me clear my head, maybe give me some perspective. The Smokies had always been a place of peace for me. My dad used to take me camping here when I was a kid, back when life was simple, before the bottle got its hooks into me. I pulled out my phone, flicking through pictures of those old trips. My thumb hesitated over the last photo of my dad and me standing by a roaring campfire. That was before everything went to hell, before the drinking became my escape from everything I couldn't face. The phone buzzed, pulling me back to the present. It was my brother, Jake, checking in as usual. "Hey, man," he said when I answered. "How's the trip? You hanging in there?" Jake was always the responsible one. Clean-cut, married with kids, a steady job. He'd been my lifeline after the wreckage of my addiction. I owed him more than I could ever repay. "Yeah, it's good," I lied. "Just me and the trees, peaceful." "You staying out of trouble?" I chuckled. "I'm not exactly near any temptations out here," I said. I didn't tell him about the bottle I'd brought with me. It sat in the back of the RV, unopened but still there, just in case. A cruel comfort. I'd stared at it more than once already, the amber liquid calling to me in the quiet. "Good to hear," Jake said, though I could hear the doubt in his voice. "Just keep your head straight, all right? I know it's tough being out there alone, but you got this. Call me if you need anything." "I will. Thanks." I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the bed. The sun was setting outside, casting long shadows through the trees. The sky faded from a soft orange to deep purple, and with it, the familiar sense of isolation began to settle in. The first night in the Smokies should have been serene, but as soon as the darkness took over, I felt it, the unease. The forest around me was too quiet. It was like it was holding its breath. No wind, no rustling leaves, just the faint crackle of my campfire outside. I sat at the picnic table near the fire, trying to relax, but the silence only seemed to grow heavier. I poked at the flames with a stick, hoping they'd somehow keep the stillness at bay. Then I heard it, a whistle. Faint at first, like a breeze cutting through the trees, but unmistakably human. I froze, listening. It was tuneless, just a single drawn-out note that seemed to float through the air. I scanned the tree line, but there was nothing. No movement. No one else was supposed to be this far out. I'd parked in a secluded area of the park, away from the main trails. The whistling continued, soft but constant. "Probably just the wind," I muttered to myself, but even as I said it, I knew that wasn't true. It didn't sound like wind. It sounded deliberate. I stood, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling, and slowly circled the fire. I kept the flames between me and the trees, my eyes darting between the dark shapes of the pines. The whistle came again, louder this time, closer. My heart hammered in my chest, the familiar anxiety clawing its way up my throat. "Who's there?" I called, my voice breaking the thick silence. No response, just another long, drawn-out whistle. I grabbed my flashlight from the RV and swept the beam through the trees. The light cut through the darkness, but all I saw were shadows. No footsteps, no crunch of leaves, just that damn whistling, drifting through the trees like a ghost. Didn't sleep much that night. The next day, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. It had to be nothing, right? Just a trick of the wind. The mountains could be strange like that, especially at night. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The bottle of whiskey in the back of the RV started to look more and more appealing, but I shoved that thought down. I wasn't here for that. Not this time. To clear my head, I went for a hike, following a trail that wound through the dense forest. The air was crisp, the smell of pine and damp earth filling my lungs. For a while it worked. I could almost forget about the night before. Almost. That's when I saw the first marking. It was carved into the bark of a tree, a rough, jagged symbol that looked like a spiral or maybe an eye. I couldn't tell. It didn't look natural, though. It felt intentional, like a warning. I ran my fingers over it, the grooves deep and uneven. I kept walking, but the further I went, the more of the symbols I saw. Spirals, faces, strange runes carved into the trees, all leading deeper into the woods. It felt like they were guiding me somewhere, though I wasn't sure I wanted to find out where. That night, the whistling returned. I was sitting by the fire again, trying to keep my mind off the bottle, when the sound came drifting through the trees. This time, it wasn't soft, it was louder, closer. I stood up, flashlight in hand, and scanned the forest. My heart pounded in my ears, my mouth went dry. The whistling seemed to circle the campsite, moving slowly but deliberately. It was all I could hear, filling the silence like a haunting lullaby. I turned, and that's when I saw him. Standing just beyond the tree line was a figure. A man, gaunt and pale, his hollow eyes fixed on me. He stood motionless, his lips pursed as he whistled that same eerie, tuneless note. "Hey," I called, my voice cracking. "What do you want?" The figure didn't respond. He just stood there, watching me. The whistling grew louder, more insistent, cutting through the night air like a knife. I took a step toward him, but as soon as I moved, he turned and disappeared into the trees. My hands were shaking. I wasn't sure if it was fear or something else, something deeper. I felt the urge to chase him, to follow that haunting sound, but my legs refused to move. I stayed by the fire until dawn, too scared to go back inside the RV. The next day I tried to leave. I packed up my gear, grabbed the keys to the RV, and decided I'd had enough of the Smokies. But when I tried to start the engine, it wouldn't turn over, just a dull click. I swore under my breath, popped the hood, and checked the battery. Everything looked fine, but the damn thing wouldn't start. I tried calling Jake, but my phone was dead. I'd charged it the night before, but now it was completely drained. No signal, no service, nothing. The forest around me felt suffocating. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting just beyond the trees. The whistling started again, faint at first, then growing louder like a taunting melody. I grabbed the bottle from the back of the RV. I wasn't going to drink it, not yet. But holding it made me feel better, more in control, as if I could use it as a weapon somehow. That night, the stranger came back. I woke up to the sound of whistling, loud, sharp, right outside the RV. I sat up, heart pounding, and looked out the window. He was standing by the fire pit, his pale face illuminated by the flames. His eyes were fixed on me, unblinking, and that awful whistling filled the air, pressing in on me from all sides. He took a step toward the RV, and I felt the panic rise in my chest. I grabbed the bottle, holding it like a club, and stumbled outside. The air was freezing, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The whistling pierced through my skull, making it hard to think. I raised the bottle, ready to throw it, but then something stopped me. For the first time in days, I heard something else. A voice. Faint but real. Jake's voice. "Nick, don't do it." I blinked, shaking my head. The stranger was gone. The whistling had stopped, and there, in the silence, I realized what I had been about to do. The bottle slipped from my hands and shattered on the ground. I dropped to my knees, gasping for air, the weight of everything crashing down on me. The whistling was gone, but the fear, the isolation, it wasn't something I could run from. Not out here, not anywhere. When the sun rose, I tried the RV again. This time, it started. I drove out of the Smokies that morning, not looking back. The whistling stayed behind, lost in the trees, but the memory of it, the temptation, would stay with me. 6 months sober. But this trip taught me something I hadn't been ready to face. Some demons don't live in bottles. They live in the silence, in the spaces we create for ourselves when we're trying to hide from the world. My name is Paul Miller, and I'm 42 years old. This happened last fall at Spruce Knob, the highest peak in West Virginia. I had just finalized my divorce, packed up my life, and hit the road in an RV that still smelled like the dealership. I told myself this trip was about reconnecting with nature, about finding some clarity, but really, I was running from guilt, loneliness, and the wreckage of a life I'd built and then broken. I chose Spruce Knob because it was isolated, and isolation was exactly what I thought I needed. I didn't know the stories. I didn't know about the Devil's Rock. If I had, I'd like to think I would have turned back, but honestly, I don't know if I could have resisted. I arrived in the late afternoon, the sun slipping behind the ridge as I parked my RV at a campsite near the summit. The forest here was dense, the spruce trees standing like sentinels in the fading light. I set up a small fire and sat by it, nursing a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. That's when I met Eli. He was the kind of man who looked like he belonged in the mountains, tall, broad-shouldered, and weathered like an old oak tree. I'd stopped by the trailhead earlier to get a map, and he must have noticed the out-of-date plates on my RV because he wandered over to introduce himself. "You're new around here," he said, his voice gravelly but not unkind. Just passing through, I replied. We talked for a while, mostly about the trails and the weather. Then, as if it were an afterthought, Eli asked, "You hear about the Devil's Rock yet?" I shook my head, curious despite myself. "It's an old legend," he said, leaning against a tree. "There's a boulder deep in the woods, smooth as glass, they say. Folks claim if you touch it, you can make a wish, but it always comes at a price." I laughed nervously. "And what's the price?" Eli's eyes darkened. "Depends. Sometimes it's your sanity, sometimes it's worse." I tried to brush it off as campfire talk, but his tone stayed with me long after he walked away. The first night was uneventful, but strange things started happening the next day. I set out on one of the trails Eli had recommended, hoping to clear my head and maybe snap a few photos. The forest was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the sound of my boots crunching on the dirt. That's when I noticed the trail veering off to the right, unmarked and overgrown. I don't know why, but I felt compelled to follow it. The path twisted through the trees, narrowing until I reached a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a massive boulder, smooth and black, its surface glinting faintly in the dim light. Dead trees surrounded it, their branches bare and skeletal. I didn't stay long. There was something about the place that made my skin crawl. That night, the tapping started. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard it, a soft rhythmic tapping against the side of the RV. I froze, my heart pounding. It sounded like someone or something was knocking. But when I finally mustered the courage to look outside, there was nothing there. The next morning I found small handprints in the dirt outside the RV. They were faint, but unmistakable, as if left by a child. I shook it off as my imagination. But later that day, I saw her. She was standing just off the trail, a teenage girl with pale skin and long, dark hair. She wore a tattered dress that looked like something out of a history book, and her eyes were wide and pleading. "Are you lost?" I called out. She nodded, but didn't speak. I stepped toward her, but before I could get close, she turned and darted into the woods. I chased after her, shouting for her to wait, but she disappeared, leaving no trace but a trail of faint footprints leading toward the clearing. When I returned to the RV, the unease I'd been feeling turned into something darker. I couldn't shake the girl's image from my mind, her hollow eyes and the way she seemed to vanish into thin air. That night, I dreamed about the Devil's Rock. In the dream, the girl was sitting on the boulder, her hands resting on its smooth surface. Her voice was soft but insistent. "It can give you what you want." When I woke, I couldn't get her words out of my head. The next morning, I decided to find the boulder again. I didn't know what I was expecting. Answers, maybe, or closure. The unmarked trail was easier to find this time, as if it had been waiting for me. The clearing was just as I remembered it, the boulder looming in the center like some ancient monolith. The air was heavy, the kind of heaviness that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. And then she appeared. The girl stood on the far side of the boulder, her expression vacant. She raised a hand, motioning for me to come closer. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. She didn't answer. Instead, she placed her hand on the boulder and whispered, "It can give you what you want." I hesitated, my heart pounding. The memory of my family, the laughter of my kids, the warmth of my ex-wife's smile flooded my mind. I hadn't seen them in months, and the thought of a second chance was intoxicating. Before I could stop myself, I reached out and touched the rock. At first, nothing happened. I felt a faint vibration beneath my fingers, but that was all. Disappointed, I returned to the RV, trying to convince myself it had been a foolish impulse. But that evening, my phone rang. It was my ex-wife. "I've been thinking about us," she said, her voice tentative. "Maybe we should talk." The weight in my chest lifted, replaced by a flicker of hope. I thought the rock had worked, that I'd been given a miracle. But the miracle came with a price. That night, the girl returned. She appeared outside the RV, her face pressed against the window. Her eyes were no longer pleading. They were dark, empty voids that seemed to suck the air from the room. "You made your wish," she whispered. "Now it's time to pay." The lights in the RV flickered, and the shadows inside began to twist and rise. I grabbed a flashlight and stumbled outside, shouting into the darkness. "What do you want from me?" Her voice came from everywhere at once. "It's not me, it's the rock." Desperate, I raced back to the clearing. The forest seemed alive, the trees closing in around me as I ran. When I reached the boulder, it seemed larger, its surface pulsing like a living thing. The girl appeared again, her form shifting and flickering like a glitch in a video. "You can't undo it," she said, her voice echoing, "but you can stop it from taking more." I grabbed a hammer from my pack and swung it at the boulder. The impact sent a shockwave through the clearing, and the girl screamed, her voice merging with the sound of the rock cracking. The boulder split down the middle, a deafening roar echoing through the forest. The girl collapsed, her form dissolving into mist as the air grew still. When I woke the next morning, the clearing was empty. The boulder was gone, reduced to a pile of rubble. I returned to the RV and called my ex-wife, apologizing for everything. Whatever chance we had at reconciliation, I knew it had to come from me, not from some cursed rock. As I drove away from Spruce Knob, I caught a glimpse of the girl in my rearview mirror, standing among the trees. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't angry either. She was just watching. Sometimes the things we want most come at a price too steep to pay, and sometimes we have to let go to move forward. My name is Carol Sanders. I'm 33 years old, and this happened last October in Blackwater Falls State Park, West Virginia. I had just landed my first solo freelance assignment, a travel feature for an outdoor magazine. It was my chance to prove to myself, and maybe to a few others, that I could thrive on my own after leaving a toxic relationship. I didn't expect the park's breathtaking beauty to be marred by whispers of the past, or that those whispers would grow louder with each passing night. When I first arrived, the park was everything I'd hoped for. My RV fit snugly into a secluded campsite overlooking the gorge, the roar of the falls constant in the distance. Blackwater Falls was a photographer's dream. Cascading water, mist rising through the gorge, and vibrant autumn foliage painted in fiery reds and oranges. The first day was perfect. I hiked, shot hundreds of photos, and scribbled notes about the trails and wildlife. The peace and quiet were a balm, exactly what I needed after months of turmoil. That evening, I sat by the fire, sipping tea and scrolling through my shots. That's when I saw it for the first time. At the edge of one frame, a figure stood between two trees. It was a man, his clothes ragged and his face shadowed. I frowned, zooming in, but the details remained blurred. I didn't remember seeing anyone during my hike, and the figure hadn't appeared in any other photos. I shook it off as an optical illusion, probably a trick of light and shadows, and went to bed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The second day brought strange encounters. I started the morning by stopping at the visitor center, hoping to get some local insight. The woman behind the counter, Maggie, was friendly but seemed to be watching me too closely. She eyed my camera gear and smiled knowingly. "Planning to photograph the falls?" she asked. "That's the idea," I replied. Maggie hesitated, her smile faltering. "Be careful around the falls, especially near dusk. The dead don't like company." I blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" Before I could ask more, she turned to help another guest, leaving me with a vague unease. Later, on a trail to the falls, I ran into Gary, a park ranger. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a weathered face and a genial demeanor. As he gave me a quick overview of the park's history, I brought up Maggie's warning. He chuckled. "Oh, that's just local folklore. Back in the Civil War, there was a Confederate soldier who hid out in the gorge. They say he deserted his regiment and was hunted down near the falls. Some folks claim his spirit never left, but I've worked here for years and never seen a thing." I tried to laugh with him, but his words stayed with me. That evening, the first real sign of something unnatural occurred. I set up my tripod near the falls, hoping to capture the golden hour light. As I framed the shot, my breath caught. The air around me had turned frigid, my breath fogging in front of me despite the mild weather. My camera refused to focus, the lens shuddering as if something was blocking it. And then, faint but unmistakable, I heard whispers. I spun around, expecting to see other hikers, but I was alone. The whispers grew louder, overlapping and indecipherable, like a crowd speaking just out of earshot. The unease became unbearable, and I packed up in a rush, leaving the falls as the last light of day faded. That night, back at the RV, I reviewed the day's photos. Most were stunning, the falls bathed in warm, golden light, but in 3 of them, the figure from the previous day appeared again. This time, he was closer. Standing at the edge of the water, his face was clearer now, pale, gaunt, with dark hollows where his eyes should have been. And in the last photo, he was staring directly at the camera. I slammed my laptop shut and locked the RV door. The next morning, I debated cutting the trip short, but a part of me couldn't let it go. I'd always prided myself on being rational, and I wasn't going to let a few strange occurrences ruin my assignment. While hiking near the falls, I noticed an overgrown side trail. Curiosity tugged at me, and I followed it, ducking beneath low-hanging branches. It led to a clearing where the air felt heavier, almost oppressive. In the center of the clearing was a patch of disturbed earth, as though something had been buried there long ago. Nearby, I found an object half buried in the dirt, a weathered leather journal. The pages were brittle but legible, written in a looping, old-fashioned script. The entries told the story of a Confederate soldier who had deserted his regiment and fled into the gorge. His words were filled with fear and desperation. The nights grow colder, and I hear them coming. I cannot outrun my fate. The last entry read, "They will find me tonight. I will not see another sunrise." I closed the journal, my hands trembling. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the oppressive feeling returned. The RV's lights flickered and shadows danced across the walls, moving in ways that didn't match the firelight outside. And then I saw him. The soldier stood at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the firelight. He didn't move, didn't blink, but his hollow eyes locked onto mine. My chest tightened with fear as I realized he wasn't alone. Shadows emerged from the trees, darker and more twisted, their forms writhing like smoke. They whispered accusations, voices overlapping in a cacophony. "Traitor, coward, you will not leave." Panicking, I grabbed the journal and held it up. "Is this what you want?" I shouted. The soldier's expression shifted, sadness, perhaps gratitude, and he gestured toward the disturbed earth I'd seen earlier. I understood. Clutching the journal, I ran back to the clearing. The shadows followed, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. My hands shook as I placed the journal on the grave and whispered a quiet prayer for peace. The air around me grew still. The shadows stopped, their forms dissolving into the night. The soldier lingered for a moment longer, his hollow eyes softening before fading into the mist. By morning, the oppressive feeling had lifted. The forest seemed brighter, the air lighter, and for the first time in days, I felt safe. Before leaving, I stopped at the visitor center to return the journal. Maggie was there, her knowing smile greeting me. "You helped him, didn't you?" she asked, her voice soft. I nodded, unsure how to respond. She reached out, patting my hand. "He's free now. You did a good thing." As I drove away from Blackwater Falls, I realized the experience had changed me. I didn't have all the answers, but I no longer felt the weight of doubt and fear that had followed me into the park. Sometimes the past lingers in ways we can't explain, and sometimes all it takes to move forward is to lay it to rest. My name is Mary Bryant, and I was 28 when this happened. It was the summer of 2021, and I was in Greenbrier Valley, West Virginia, filming a documentary on Appalachian folklore. I thought I knew what I was getting into, a little spooky local history, some beautiful landscapes, and maybe a few nervous laughs from my friends. I was wrong. Dead wrong. It all started with Elliot, my best friend since college. Elliot's a big guy with a soft heart and an even softer spot for ghost stories. He's the one who got me into the supernatural in the first place, which is how we ended up planning this trip to the abandoned Greenbrier ghost tracks. He called it the perfect setting for my project. Elliot's girlfriend, Marcy, wasn't so enthusiastic. She's sarcastic to the bone and has a knack for poking holes in everyone's plans. Haunted train tracks? Really? She scoffed when we pitched it. What's next? A seance in the Walmart parking lot. Still, she came along, probably because she didn't trust us to survive a weekend in the woods without her. Dan and Ruby rounded out the group. Dan's the life of the party, always cracking jokes and pushing boundaries, while Ruby's quiet, but she notices everything. I've known her for years, and she's got this sixth sense about people and places. It was Ruby who first warned us that something felt off. We got to the tracks late that afternoon. The forest was thick and green, the air heavy with humidity. The tracks were almost invisible beneath layers of moss and tangled weeds. If you didn't know what you were looking for, you'd miss them entirely. But the locals hadn't forgotten. They called them the ghost tracks because of the Iron Witch, a spirit said to haunt the area. Legend had it she'd been accused of witchcraft and hanged near the tracks in the 1800s. Before she died, she cursed the town, vowing to haunt anyone who trespassed on her land. The legend didn't scare me. It fascinated me. We're filming history, I said, adjusting my camera as we set up camp. The clearing wasn't ideal. Dan's tent had a broken pole, and Marcy realized she'd forgotten extra flashlight batteries, but it would do. By the time we got a fire going, the sun was dipping below the trees, painting the sky a deep orange. The first sign of trouble came after dinner. We were sitting around the fire, laughing at one of Dan's ridiculous impressions, when the forest went silent. Not gradually, like you'd expect when animals settle in for the night, but all at once, like someone had hit a switch. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just silence. Ruby was the first to speak. "Do you feel that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Feel what?" Dan said, grinning. "The sweet, sweet vibe of nature?" Ruby didn't laugh. "Something's wrong," she said. "We're not supposed to be here." Marcy rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on, it's just the woods at night. Stop trying to scare us." But I felt it too, that heavy, oppressive stillness. I tried to brush it off as nerves. I mean, I was the one who dragged us all out here, right? If anyone needed to stay rational, it was me. The second sign came a little after midnight. We were settling into our tents when we heard it. A low, rhythmic hum. Faint, but distinct, like the sound of an old train engine in the distance. Dan poked his head out of his tent, grinning. "Is that your ghost train, Jess?" "Probably just the wind," I said, though my voice sounded thin even to me. "Yeah, right. When does the wind go chugga-chugga-choo-choo?" Marcy muttered. Ruby sat bolt upright, clutching her sleeping bag. "It's not wind," she whispered. "It's her." I don't know how long I lay there staring at the tent ceiling, listening to that sound. It got louder and louder, like the train was barreling straight toward us, and then it stopped. Not faded. Stopped. I scrambled out of my tent, flashlight in hand, and found the others already outside. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the clearing. "What the hell was that?" Elliot asked, his voice shaking. "I don't know," I said, "but we should stay together." Ruby was the first to notice the scratches on the trees. Deep, jagged marks, like something or someone had taken a blade to the bark. The scratches formed strange symbols, almost like runes. I filmed them, though my hands were trembling so badly the footage probably came out useless. "This is messed up," Marcy said, backing away. "We need to leave, now." Dan laughed nervously. "What? And missed the big ghost reveal? Come on, Marcy, it's just some local pranksters messing with us." But Ruby shook her head. "No one's been here in years," she said. "This isn't a prank." The third sign came when Marcy disappeared. She'd stormed off after another argument with Elliot, saying she needed some space. We waited, calling her name, but she didn't come back. Finally, Elliot and I grabbed our flashlights and went looking for her, leaving Ruby and Dan by the fire. We found her an hour later, stumbling out of the trees, her arms scratched and bleeding. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror. "Marcy, what happened?" I asked, rushing to her side. She looked at me, trembling. "I heard you," she said, "calling me, but it wasn't you. It wasn't you." Back at camp, things went from bad to worse. Dan tried to lighten the mood, cracking jokes about camping with Casper, but even he couldn't hide how scared he was. Ruby sat by the fire, staring into the flames, muttering something under her breath. "What's she doing?" I whispered to Elliot. "Praying, I think," he said. "Her grandmother told her about this place, said it was cursed." The attack came just before dawn. We were packing up, ready to leave, when the forest exploded with noise. Branches snapping, leaves rustling, something heavy crashing through the underbrush. And then it hit Dan. I don't know how to describe it. One moment he was standing there, cracking a joke. The next, he was flying backwards, slamming into a tree with a sickening crack. He screamed, clutching his leg, which was bent at an unnatural angle. "Get him up!" I yelled. But the thing, whatever it was, wasn't done. It circled us, its shadow flickering in the firelight. I caught glimpses of it. Long limbs, pale skin stretched tight over bones, and a face. God, that face. It wasn't human. Ruby saved us. She grabbed a knife from her bag, slicing her palm and letting her blood drip onto the ground. She chanted something in a language I didn't understand, her voice steady despite the chaos around us. The thing stopped, its head tilted like it was listening, and then it vanished. We carried Dan out of the woods, Marcy supporting one side of him, Elliot and I taking the other. Ruby led the way, her bloody hand pressed to her chest. We didn't stop until we reached the road. Days later, I reviewed the footage. Most of it was unusable. Shaky shots, too dark to see anything. But there was one clip that made my blood run cold. It showed me, standing by the fire, filming the group, and behind me, in the shadows, was the figure. It was watching us. I haven't been back to Greenbrier since. I don't think I ever will. But sometimes, late at night, I hear that hum again, the sound of a train that doesn't exist, and I wonder if the Iron Witch is still out there, waiting for her next trespassers. My name is Brian Gibson, and I was 42 years old when this happened in the summer of 2023. After retiring from the military, I spent most of my days traveling the country in my RV, searching for something I couldn't quite name. Peace, maybe, or just a sense of purpose. I'd spent decades in combat zones, surrounded by noise and chaos, and I thought the wilderness might silence the ghosts in my head. That's what brought me to the Laurel Fork Wilderness in West Virginia. I'd heard about the area from a fellow camper, a secluded stretch of forest, untouched and serene, perfect for someone like me who preferred solitude. I didn't know then about the stories surrounding Devil's Hollow or the witch that locals claimed had cursed the land. If I had, I might have gone somewhere else. Or maybe not. The first day was uneventful. The road to my chosen campsite was narrow and bumpy, the kind of terrain that tested your patience and your vehicle. My RV wasn't new, but it had served me well over the years. Still, it groaned and sputtered as I navigated the steep incline toward the hollow. About a mile from my intended spot, the engine stalled. I cursed under my breath, turning the key repeatedly, but all I got was the tired whine of a machine that had had enough. I grabbed my tools, hoping it was something simple, but as the hours dragged on, it became clear that I wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. "Well," I muttered, wiping grease from my hands, "guess this is home for now." I set up camp just off the road, close enough to the hollow to feel its presence, but far enough to keep my distance. The air was cooler here, the shadows deeper. I told myself it was just the terrain, the dense canopy blocking out the sun, but there was something else too, a heaviness I couldn't explain. The first night I slept poorly. The forest was too quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies every creak and rustle. I'd spent enough time in the wild to know the sounds of nocturnal animals, but this was different. There were no owls, no crickets, nothing but the occasional groan of the wind through the trees. At some point, I thought I heard something outside the RV, a faint scratching like claws against metal. I froze, listening, but it stopped as quickly as it had started. When I finally worked up the nerve to look, flashlight in hand, there was nothing there. Just the endless expanse of trees. I told myself it was the wind and went back to bed. But sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, I found the dead birds. They were arranged in a perfect circle about 10 feet from my RV, their feathers ruffled but otherwise untouched. There were no signs of an attack, no blood, just 7 small bodies, their lifeless eyes staring up at the canopy. My stomach churned as I stood over them, trying to make sense of it. Predators don't do this. Even kids pulling pranks wouldn't bother hiking this far out. I buried them more out of respect than anything else, and spent the rest of the day exploring the area. The forest was dense, the trails barely more than animal paths winding through the underbrush. About a mile in, I found the first symbol. It was carved into the bark of a tree, a jagged spiral surrounded by smaller runes I didn't recognize. The cuts were fresh, the edges of the bark still raw. My first thought was kids again, but the precision of the carvings made me second guess. This wasn't random graffiti. It meant something, though I didn't know what. That night, the storm rolled in. The wind howled through the hollow, rain hammering against the roof of the RV. I huddled inside, reading by flashlight, the sound of the storm oddly comforting. It drowned out the silence, the oppressive weight of the forest. But then the whispers started. At first, I thought it was the wind, the way it curled around the trees, carrying the echoes of distant sounds. But as I listened, the whispers grew more distinct, more deliberate. They weren't words exactly, but they carried intent, a low, murmuring chant that made my skin crawl. I tried to ignore it, burying my head in my book, but the sound burrowed into my mind. It felt like it was coming from inside the RV, pressing against my skull. And then I saw her. She stood just outside the window, barely visible through the rain-streaked glass, a cloaked figure, her face hidden in the shadows of her hood. She didn't move, didn't make a sound, but her presence was suffocating. I grabbed my flashlight and swung open the door, but by the time I stepped outside, she was gone. The next day, I found the grave marker. It was tucked deep within the hollow, a small stone slab half buried in moss and dirt. The name was barely legible, worn down by centuries of weather. Margaret Ellis. Beside it, I found a charred leather diary, its pages brittle and stained. I flipped through it carefully, piecing together fragments of Margaret's story. She wasn't a witch, not in the way the legends claimed. She'd been a healer, accused by her neighbors when a plague swept through the settlement. They blamed her for the deaths, dragging her into the hollow and burning her at the stake. Her final entry was a curse, scrawled in trembling handwriting. To those who condemned me, I curse this hollow with my dying breath. May your bloodline suffer as I have suffered, and may no soul find peace in this cursed place. That night was the worst. The storm returned, fiercer than before, and the whispers gave way to screams. They were everywhere, echoing off the walls of the RV, filling every corner with their anguish. The cloaked figure appeared again, closer this time. She stood in the middle of the clearing, her hood pulled back to reveal a face that was both beautiful and grotesque, her eyes burning like embers. "Why did you come here?" she asked, her voice a low growl that vibrated in my chest. My throat tightened, the words catching like barbed wire. "I didn't know," I managed to say, her expression twisted into a sneer. "They never know." She raised a hand and the world tilted. I fell to my knees, my vision blurring as memories flooded my mind. Moments I'd tried so hard to forget. The sounds of gunfire, the screams of my comrades, the smell of blood and burning sand. "Stop!" I shouted, clutching my head. "Please stop!" The screams faded, replaced by her laughter. "You carry death with you, soldier," she said. "Why should I spare you?" Desperate, I fumbled for my dog tags, ripping them from my neck. "I'm sorry," I choked out, holding them up. "For whatever they did to you, I'm sorry." Her laughter stopped. She stared at the tags, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she lowered her hand. The storm ceased. The whispers faded, and she was gone. The next morning, I left the hollow. My RV started without a hitch, as if the past few days had been nothing more than a bad dream. But as I drove down the winding road, I couldn't shake the feeling that Margaret Ellis was watching me, her presence lingering in the shadows. I don't know if I appeased her or if she simply let me go. But I do know one thing. There are places in this world that remember the horrors done to them, places that hold grudges, and Devil's Hollow is one of them. My name is Paul Miller. I'm 35 years old, and I used to be a park ranger before I shifted to city planning. I've always been the type to keep a level head under pressure, but that weekend in Ocala National Forest changed the way I see the world and myself forever. It's hard to explain what we encountered without sounding insane, but I'll do my best. This happened in April 2014. My girlfriend Emma, two friends, Tyler and Kelly, and I decided to take an RV trip into the heart of Ocala. Emma, 30, has always been an avid nature enthusiast, and she had been itching to show us Alexander Springs, where the water is crystal clear and the trails promise adventure. Tyler, 28, my childhood friend, and Kelly, his girlfriend, were tagging along mostly because they loved camping, though Kelly was more into the safety of RV life than the rugged outdoors. Looking back, I wish I had trusted Kelly's unease from the start. We arrived at our campsite around mid-afternoon on a Friday, excited to leave behind the noise of the city. The RV, which I'd borrowed from my brother, was parked in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. The air smelled fresh, the kind of scent you can only get deep in the woods. We unpacked quickly, tents for Tyler and Kelly, while Emma and I would use the RV. "See? Perfect," Tyler said, slapping me on the back. "We needed this, man. Get the old crew together." Emma was already wandering the edge of the woods with her camera. "The biodiversity here is incredible," she called back, her voice tinged with excitement. "It's so quiet, though." It was quiet, eerily so. Usually you'd hear birds chirping, insects buzzing something. Instead, the forest felt like it was holding its breath. I chalked it up to being farther out than usual. That first night was uneventful. We built a fire, roasted marshmallows, and told the same dumb stories Tyler and I had been recycling since we were teenagers. Kelly, however, seemed uncomfortable. She kept glancing over her shoulder and leaning closer to Tyler. "What's up?" I asked her. "Nothing," she muttered. It's so dark out here." "It's the woods, Kel," Tyler said with a grin. "It's supposed to be dark." We laughed it off and went to bed. I didn't know it then, but the forest had already started watching us. The next morning, Emma convinced us to hike a nearby trail. She was thrilled to explore, and I figured it'd be good to stretch our legs. Kelly was reluctant, but joined anyway. We hadn't gone far when Emma froze. She pointed at the ground, a single footprint, barefoot and large. But it wasn't just big. The toes were elongated, tipped with what looked like claw marks. "Bear?" Tyler guessed. "No," Emma said, crouching. "Bears don't leave prints like this." Kelly took a step back. "Let's just go back. This feels wrong." "Relax," Tyler said, brushing it off. "It's probably some weird hiker. People are strange out here." Emma shot me a glance, her brows knitted. I nodded for her to keep walking. The hike became more unsettling the farther we went. The quieter the woods got, the occasional snapping of twigs sounding deliberate, like something was following us. Kelly kept muttering that she wanted to turn around, and even Tyler's usual cockiness began to falter. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. By the time we got back to camp, everyone was tense. We decided to stick close to the RV for the evening. As I gathered firewood near the edge of the clearing, I heard Emma calling my name. "James!" It was distant, coming from deeper in the woods. I frowned. Emma had been by the fire a minute ago. "James! Come here!" The voice was louder now, insistent. My gut told me something was off, but curiosity won out. I stepped into the tree line. "Emma?" I called. The voice stopped. I turned back toward camp and nearly collided with Emma herself. "Where were you going?" she asked, breathless. "I heard you," I said, shaken. "You were calling me." Her face went pale. I didn't say anything. That night, things got worse. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of movement outside the RV, slow, deliberate footsteps crunching the pine needles. I nudged Emma awake and whispered for her to stay quiet. Peering through the curtain, I spotted a figure near the fire pit. It was humanoid, but wrong. Its limbs were too long, and its posture was bent as though it had been broken and pieced back together. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out, heart-hammering. "Who's there?" I barked. The figure turned to look at me, and I swear it smiled. Not a friendly smile, but a wide, unnatural grin that made my stomach churn. Before I could react, it darted into the woods with an animalistic speed, leaving no trace. The next morning, we found deep claw marks on the side of the RV and the smoldering remains of our firewood scattered around. Tyler laughed nervously. "Okay, so someone's messing with us." "Someone?" Emma shot back. "You think a person did that?" "It's probably a prank," Tyler insisted. "Locals messing with tourists." Kelly wasn't convinced. "This isn't normal, Tyler. That thing last night wasn't human." Emma spoke up. "There's a Navajo legend about skinwalkers, shapeshifters that take the form of animals or people to deceive you. They can mimic voices, even faces." "This isn't the Southwest," Tyler scoffed. "That's a desert legend." "Legends travel," Emma snapped, "and whatever it is, it's here." The argument spiraled until I stepped in. "Enough, we're leaving. Pack up and let's go." As we scrambled to break camp, the forest closed in. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional crack of branches far too close for comfort. Kelly stayed by the RV, clutching her arms as if shielding herself from something unseen. Then we heard it, Tyler's voice calling from the woods. "Guys, I found something. Come check it out." We froze. Tyler was right next to me, his face draining of color. "Stay here," I said, grabbing a flashlight and stepping into the trees. Tyler followed, despite my protests. The deeper we went, the darker it became. Then we saw it, a figure standing between the pines, its back to us. It looked just like Tyler. "Hey," I shouted. The figure turned. Its face, a twisted, grotesque mockery of Tyler's features. Its eyes were too large, its mouth stretched too wide. Before we could react, it let out a guttural, inhuman screech and charged. We bolted back to camp, adrenaline pumping. "We're leaving now," I shouted. Everyone piled into the RV as I started the engine. The tires spun in the loose dirt before catching, and we sped down the forest road. But the thing didn't stop. It ran alongside us, its limbs moving in unnatural jerks. Its mouth formed words that weren't quite right. "James," it mimicked, its voice distorted. "Don't leave." Emma screamed as it slammed against the side of the RV, claws screeching against the metal. Tyler grabbed a hatchet from the supplies and swung wildly at the window, shattering the glass and forcing the creature to fall back. We didn't stop until we reached a ranger station at the edge of the forest, shaking and covered in scratches from the shattered glass. The ranger took one look at us. "Around Alexander Springs?" he asked. We nodded. He sighed. "You're lucky you made it out." We never talked about that trip again. Tyler and I drifted apart after that, and Kelly refused to camp ever again. Emma became obsessed with the legends, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. As for me, I haven't set foot in the woods since. Some places are wild, not because of the animals or terrain, but because something else lives there. Something that watches, waits, and hungers. My name is Mary Bryant. I'm 39 years old, and I work as a children's book illustrator. This happened just last fall when I decided to take my RV to Ocala National Forest in Florida. I wasn't looking for trouble, only a bit of peace and quiet, a break from relentless deadlines, and hopefully some inspiration for my next book. I thought the stillness of the forest would calm my racing thoughts. Instead, it left me with nightmares I can't escape. It was early October, and the forest was alive with color. The cypress trees, draped in Spanish moss, towered around me as I navigated my RV down a narrow dirt road. My dog, Max, sat in the passenger seat, his ears pricked with curiosity. He was always my loyal shadow, and I was glad for his company. I parked near Juniper Springs, a spot I'd chosen for its seclusion and beauty. The spring shimmered in the afternoon sunlight, crystal clear and eerily still. I set up camp, unpacking my sketch pad and a few supplies. Sheriff Benson, a gruff local I'd met at the trailhead, had warned me to stick to the marked trails and not wander after dark. He mentioned something about the Devil's Lantern, but I waved him off. Every place had its ghost stories. I wasn't here for folklore. I was here to work. The first night was uneventful, though the silence felt heavy. The usual hum of crickets and frogs seemed muted. Max growled a few times at nothing in particular, but I figured he was just adjusting to the new surroundings. I spent the next day sketching the landscape, trying to capture the ways the sunlight filtered through the trees. Max explored the area, occasionally coming back to nudge me for attention. I was starting to feel relaxed, even inspired, until night fell. It started with the light. At first, I thought it was a firefly glowing faintly through the trees, but the glow grew brighter, flickering like a lantern. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the RV. Max followed, his hackles raised. The light hovered just beyond the edge of the campsite, swaying slightly as if someone were carrying it. "Hello?" I called out, shining my flashlight toward it. No response. The light retreated, bobbing deeper into the woods. Against my better judgment, I took a few steps closer. "Is someone there? Do you need help?" Max barked sharply, snapping me out of my daze. I realized my feet were inches from the trail's edge, and the lantern was much farther away than I'd thought. It wasn't waiting for me, it was leading me. I backed away, pulling Max inside the RV and locking the door. The light flickered one last time before vanishing. I told myself it was a trick of the light or maybe a prank by some local kids, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling it left behind. I spent the morning sketching, but my hand felt unsteady. I kept glancing at the tree line, half expecting to see the lantern again. When I finally looked down at my sketch pad, I froze. I hadn't been drawing the spring or the trees. I'd been drawing her. A woman, faint and glowing, stood at the edge of my page. Her face was obscured, but her outline was unmistakable. I hadn't drawn her intentionally. My hand had moved on its own. Max growled low in his throat, pulling me from my thoughts. He was staring at the door, his ears flattened. "It's okay, boy," though I wasn't sure I believed it. That night, the whispers started. I woke to the sound of footsteps circling the RV. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon, but the steps were too deliberate, too heavy. Max barked and scratched at the door, his teeth bared. Then I heard the laughter. It was faint, like a child giggling, but it sent a chill down my spine. I peered out the window, but saw nothing. The footsteps stopped and the laughter faded. I sat in the dark, clutching Max until the first rays of sunlight broke through the trees. The next morning, I decided to explore the trails, hoping to clear my head. Sheriff Benson's warning echoed in my mind, but I dismissed it. I couldn't let a few strange noises ruin my trip. I followed the marked trail for about a mile before I saw the carvings, symbols, circles, crosses, and spirals etched into the bark of several trees. They looked old, weathered by time, but they didn't feel random. I sketched them into my notebook, intending to research them later. As I turned back toward the RV, I saw it again, the lantern. This time, it wasn't distant. It hovered just a few yards away, glowing faintly in the dim light of the forest. My heart pounded as I stared at it, unable to move. Then it began to drift, pulling me deeper into the woods. "Mary." The voice was soft, almost melodic, and it seemed to come from the light itself. Max barked furiously, breaking the spell. I turned and ran, dragging him behind me. When I reached the RV, I slammed the door shut and didn't leave for the rest of the day. By the time night fell, I was ready to leave. I'd packed most of my things and planned to drive out first thing in the morning. But the forest had other plans. The lantern appeared again, closer than ever, just outside the RV. Its glow seeped through the windows, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Max barked and growled, his body pressed against my legs. Then I heard the knock. It was soft, polite, almost human. But when I looked out the window, no one was there. Just the lantern, swaying gently. The knocking grew louder, more insistent, until it echoed through the RV. "Leave me alone," I shouted, clutching a flashlight like a weapon. The knocking stopped. Silence. Then the door creaked open. The lantern floated inside, its glow illuminating the cramped space. Behind it, the figure of a woman took shape. Her face was pale, her eyes empty voids, and her hair floated around her as if underwater. She reached out a hand, her voice echoing in my mind. "Stay with me." I screamed and threw the flashlight, shattering the lantern's glow. The figure dissolved into mist, and the RV was plunged into darkness. Max whimpered, and I held him tightly, tears streaming down my face. As soon as the first light of dawn broke, I started the RV and drove away without looking back. Max sat in the passenger seat, silent and watchful. My hands trembled on the wheel, but I didn't stop until I was miles from the forest. A week later, I found the sketches I'd made during the trip. The glowing woman was in every one of them, standing among the trees watching me. I burned them all. I haven't been back to the woods since. Sometimes, though, I see a faint light in the distance when I close my eyes, and sometimes I hear her voice. Mary? My name is Brian Gibson, and I'm 45 years old. This happened in late October during a weekend camping trip to Falling Waters State Park in Florida. I was there with my wife, Linda, our 10-year-old daughter, Sarah, and our 7-year-old son, Joey. What started as an ordinary family trip turned into something I'll never forget, though sometimes I wish I could. We had planned the trip as a way to disconnect from screens and reconnect as a family. I wanted to teach my kids a bit about survival skills, maybe show them how to start a fire or identify edible plants. Linda was on board, even though she had her reservations about the old RV I insisted on driving. It had its quirks, flickering lights and an engine that sometimes took a few tries to start, but I was confident it would get us through. When we arrived at Falling Waters State Park, the sun was just beginning to set. The golden light filtered through the tall pine trees, and the sound of distant birdsong filled the air. The kids were already squabbling over who got which bunk bed in the RV, and Linda sighed as she unpacked a cooler full of sandwiches and snacks. "This is going to be good for us," I said, giving her a reassuring smile. "Fresh air, family bonding, it's what we need." She nodded, but her eyes lingered on the dense woods surrounding our campsite. "Sure, as long as nothing breaks down." That evening, we gathered around a small fire I built. Joey poked at the flames with a stick, while Sarah sat off to the side, scribbling in a notebook she'd brought along for stories. She had a vivid imagination, always making up tales about fairies and witches. Linda read a book, her face illuminated by the warm glow of the firelight. "What are you writing about, kiddo?" I asked Sarah. She looked up and smiled. "A friend I met today." My heart sank for a moment, thinking she might have wandered off and spoken to a stranger. "What friend?" "Ellie," she said matter-of-factly. "She lives by the waterfall." I exchanged a glance with Linda. "You didn't go off alone, did you?" Sarah shook her head. "No, I didn't meet her in person. She just started talking to me when we got here." Linda frowned. "Honey, it's okay to have an imaginary friend, but don't scare your dad like that." Sarah's expression darkened. "She's not imaginary." I didn't push it. Kids have wild imaginations, and I figured it was just part of her storytelling hobby. The first truly strange thing happened later that night. I was outside stoking the fire one last time before bed when I heard it. Faint laughter coming from the woods. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. I stood still, straining to hear over the crackle of the fire. "Kids," I called. But they were already inside the RV with Linda. The laughter faded, and I told myself it was probably another camper. Still, it put me on edge. The next morning, Linda complained about a cold draft in the RV. "It's like someone left the door open," she said, pulling her cardigan tighter. I checked the door and windows. Everything was locked up tight. We spent the day hiking to the park's main attraction, the waterfall. Sarah was unusually quiet, lagging behind and glancing over her shoulder as if expecting someone to appear. Joey, on the other hand, was full of energy, running ahead and shouting, "Come on, slowpokes!" The trail led us to the waterfall, a beautiful cascade of water tumbling into a deep sinkhole. As we admired the view, Sarah tugged on my sleeve. "Ellie says this is where it happened," she whispered. "Where what happened?" I asked, my voice low. Sarah didn't answer. She just stared at the water. That night, the strangeness grew worse. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of faint knocking on the RV door. My first thought was that it was Joey playing a prank, but when I checked, both kids were asleep in their bunks. The knocking came again, this time from the back of the RV. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, my breath fogging in the cold night air. There were no footprints, no sign of anyone around, except for a single pair of child-sized muddy prints leading toward the woods. The next morning, Sarah seemed withdrawn, and Joey complained about bad dreams. Linda pulled me aside. "Something's not right here, Brian," she said. "The kids aren't acting like themselves." I didn't want to admit it, but I felt it too, a heaviness in the air, a sense that we weren't alone. By the third day, things reached a breaking point. Sarah began talking to Ellie out loud, carrying on conversations as if the girl were standing right beside her. When Linda tried to intervene, Sarah shouted, "You're scaring her. She doesn't like it when you yell." That night, I woke to the sound of the RV door creaking open. Sarah was gone. Panic surged through me as I grabbed a flashlight and followed her tiny footprints into the woods. I found her standing by the waterfall, her arms outstretched as if reaching for something. A faint figure stood in front of her, a young girl, soaking wet, her hair hanging in tangled strands over her pale face. "Sarah!" I shouted. The figure turned toward me, and I froze. Her eyes were hollow black pits, and her mouth twisted into a scream that echoed through the woods. Linda arrived moments later, clutching Joey's hand. Together, we pulled Sarah away from the water. The ghost didn't follow, but her presence lingered, oppressive and cold. Back in the RV, we tried to make sense of what was happening. Sarah, still dazed, murmured, "She's so lonely. She just wants someone to stay with her." I remembered the muddy footprints, the laughter, the feeling of being watched. "She's dangerous," I said. "We need to leave, now." But the RV wouldn't start. The lights flickered and the air grew colder. A loud bang came from the roof, followed by the sound of scraping metal. Linda clutched my arm. "What does she want?" "She wants Sarah," I said, my voice trembling. Linda suggested offering Ellie something to appease her. Sarah hesitated, then handed over a doll she'd brought along. "Ellie can have this," she said, "so she won't be lonely anymore." We left the doll at the base of the waterfall, whispering a prayer for Ellie to find peace. For a moment, the woods fell silent, and I thought it was over. As we drove away, the RV finally roaring to life, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a split second, I thought I saw Ellie standing at the edge of the woods, clutching the doll. Then she was gone. The kids were quieter on the ride home, and Linda seemed lost in thought. We didn't talk about what happened, not right away, but every now and then, I catch Sarah staring out the window as if listening to someone I can't hear. And sometimes when the house is quiet at night, I hear faint laughter just beyond the edge of the light.